Years ago, a common criticism was to criticize millennials for blaming everything on their parents. Then at some point, things shifted and it went, well, now it's the boomers' fault. Okay, boomer. And I think in the evangelical space, in the conservative space, we we absorbed that a little bit. And now I hate to say it, but we really do blame our parents or grandparents for a lot of things that I don't think they deserve credit for. They don't deserve the blame for. They deserve credit for a lot of things, both good and bad, but I think we need to be more clear about that. And I'm going to explain why and how that fits into our main topics here at Enemies Within the Church. So, let's get into things. Welcome to the Enemies Within the Church podcast. You can go to EWTC News. That stands for Enemies Within the Church News. EWTCnews.com to, view the documentary if you haven't already. Maybe get an extra copy, give it to a friend. You can also stay up to date with our ongoing projects, which this podcast is part of. Now, as Enemies Within the Church is working on larger documentary projects, which take a lot of funds, there isn't enough money to keep these side projects like the podcast going. If you want to support the podcast and specifically me in doing the podcast, so you support the podcast by supporting me so that I actually can dedicate some time to this. If you would like to, you can go to the Give, Send, Go or the Patreon linked in the description. The big difference between the two is Patreon is a little bit more questionable about how long they'll support anything Christian, but there's more interaction there, whereas Give, Send, Go is a more reliable platform, but I can't do that direct back and forth interaction with you, and I like to do that. So it's your choice if you do want to support. But what are we talking about this week? Like I said, we're going to talk about generational things. Now, the ideas of generational, and it's put out there a lot nowadays. We need to think generationally, especially as Christians. We need to think generationally. The problem is when people say that, by and large, they mean one direction, forward. That we need to think generationally looking forward. And mostly what that means is you need to think about your kids and invest in your kids. Well, the future is more than just your kids now. Thinking generationally is generations, more than just one. But it's also looking backwards. Now, we love to look backwards. We really do. We do it all the time. Except we like the people that are dead. We don't like the people that are still alive. And I don't think this is such a massive, pervasive problem, or our attitudes are so off base that, oh my goodness, we need to freak out. But I think there is a bit of I think a little bit of the okay boomer attitude, which was already present in younger people. We tend to look down on the generations that came before us. But I think it's leaked in a little bit more than it should, and we should self-examine a little bit and get rid of that attitude and develop a healthy relationship with our parents and grandparents. The ones who are still with us, who are still right there, who are not the cause of all the problems we're seeing today. They're not all the cause of all the problems in your life. They're not the cause of all the problems in society. The problems society are facing are much larger and more complex than your parents, your grandparents. We need to understand that. The other thing is, you know what? They're still alive. You can go talk to them. If you think there are some changes that should happen, well, don't be a kid about it. Be a grown-up. Put on your big boy pants. But that's not just go, hey, you're responsible for these problems, so you need to change. No, it's actually developing a relationship with them. It's thinking generationally. And that really comes to the big thing. The biggest takeaway I want for this episode is understanding that if we want to change, turn things around in this country, politically, socially, but most importantly, spiritually, then we do need to think generationally. We need to have those generational connections, and that's looking backwards as much as it is looking forward. We need to take care of the previous generations. We need to look for their wisdom. We need to learn from them. We need to be involved with the previous generations as much as we are investing in future generations. You cannot have a generational mindset if it's just a single generation relating to one other generation. It takes more than that. Now, we could also define a little bit more what generational thinking is, but I think that might be a little too big for this episode because I really want you to get certain ideas. Get certain ideas that hopefully might help you to change your attitude towards whatever it is. It's not even just going to be boomers. We throw that term around, but it basically has just become anyone who is older than me is now a boomer. But or turned into an attitude. Oh, it's like it's an attitude or a way of thinking, like boomer theology or boomer con, or we put boomer onto everything. What does it even mean anymore? Who are these ethereal boomers just out in the abstract? Ooh, the boomers. No. We're talking about, again, real people. For me, that's my parents. I mean, you might look at me and go, oh, you're a younger guy. My parents are boomers. I'm not that young. And, well, this is the way I'm going to go about it. I want to talk a little bit about how significantly my attitudes towards my dad have changed. But it's not just my attitude, it's the fact that I've had to grow up. I've had to grow up and realize things, understand the world more fully. And what that does is paints a clearer picture of who my parents are in general, but who my dad is as a man, as a human, as someone who has experienced things and had to make choices, had to lead a family, had to sacrifice things, had to make judgment calls and be willing to get them wrong. My attitudes have changed, and I think it's really healthy, good change. And it's one of those things I want to hopefully spark a little bit of some thoughts in your mind about how are you relating to your parents or grandparents. Specifically, if we can change our attitudes here, if we can develop better connections to the past, we're going to be more equipped moving into the future. But, let's set the scene a little bit. So I'm the third child, and I come 8 years, 7.5, 8 years, something around there, 8 years after my closest sister. So my sisters are 8 and 10 years older than me. So I'm way down the line child. And the only boy, 2 older sisters, way older, only boy. So I got a lot of different, I lived in a very different space within my family because I was so far removed. So that, and again, only boy. So different phase of life for my parents, different sets of expectations. I'm the youngest, so I get that sort of youngest treatment. I'm also the only boy. I'm also kind of an only child for most of my life because my sisters are gone by the time I'm in fourth grade. Both of them are fully out of the house. And so that shapes a lot of things. Now, what was my relationship from the perspective? So I'm going to tell you the perspective of Kyle as a kid and moving into a young adult. And I'm going to not just give you that perspective, but I'm going to tell you things. And I'm not going to I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to dish out the things that were problems, the failures. Now, like I said, my attitude, my perspective has changed dramatically, even on those things. So I want that to be clear right off the bat. Right off the bat. Please stick around to hear the conclusion, though. But to start this off, let's move forward a little bit. I worked at a company that my dad also worked at. Now, he was a guy in the field. I was a guy in the office doing design. I was in a construction adjacent field. So I was helping make plans. He was out in the field installing. And he was a fixture, absolute fixture in this industry. Anyone that was, anyone of any importance in that industry in the region, they knew of my dad. In fact, probably out of the top 100 guys in the region, he probably trained 90% of them. And there's a reason that they became the top guys, because my dad was just that skilled. But I had a guy who had known him for a very long time stop me at one point. Really, really cool guy. Love this guy. Good Christian guy, too. He stopped me and he looked at me and said, "What was it like growing up with your dad?" And I knew immediately what he meant. Because my dad had a reputation of being someone that was difficult to work alongside. He wasn't necessarily difficult to work with in general, but he was difficult to work next to. Yeah, the guys he trained became the best guys. But, they became Navy SEALs by going through Navy SEAL training. They had to go through the rough training. They had to be able to adapt and learn and do it all quickly. The type of instructions you were going to get were going to be pretty minimal, but you were going to see and learn from the best. So I knew exactly what he meant. He was asking about, hey, your dad kind of has this reputation. What was that like as a kid for you? Is that just something that exists on the job site? Is that something that exists at home? And we had a good conversation about that, but that kind of sets the scene of who my dad is. He's going to outwork you. He's going to they put him on jobs. He probably doesn't believe this, but they'd put him on jobs that normally would be scheduled for multiple people. And they just put him. And that wasn't because he was difficult to work with. That was because he would do it and he'd do a good job. If he had to move something that would normally take multiple people, he'd find a way to do it. If he had to, hold something in place, he'd just know how to be able to do it with just one person. He was going to find a way to get stuff done. He wasn't just skilled, he was a master at his craft. And that's my dad. My dad didn't do stuff 90% of the way. He would do stuff 110%, everything, doesn't matter what it was. And that's something, you could call him a perfectionist. You could call him a workaholic. None of that really captures who he is. None of that does. None of it does. But it's also some of the things that caused the most frustration for me growing up. Because there was an expectation that the standard is not 100%. Standard is 110%. The standard is his standard of what's acceptable. And he's his toughest critic. Now, when he's his toughest critic and he's far and above most other people, that sets the standard pretty darn high. And there's almost no grace for learning. Making mistakes along the way, that's not how you learn. You get it right. Here's what you're supposed to do. That's how you get it done. Okay, now do it perfectly. Now, was he just, the super hard guy that would just trash you if you got anything wrong? That's not exactly what I'm saying. But his standard was, it's either right or it is completely wrong. And you can imagine, again, that was difficult for a kid to live up to, especially, as a boy. I'm looking up to my dad. I'm like, okay, this is the standard. This is man, not just a man. This is man. This is what a man looks like. This is what you're required to be. Well, that's very hard to live up to that. And for some weird reason, I felt like I was falling short of that a lot. But just to go into it, examples of things. I remember when I was sisters were out of the house. So this is probably when I was around 9, maybe 10. And yeah, probably around that age. And my dad told me to go get something. Now I gotta set another scene. 6-acre property. It was my great grandpa's property, and my dad had moved over there to help take care of my grandpa and the property when he was getting too old to do it. Again, that's all. Just says a little bit about the type of guy my dad is, and so we had 6 acres, partially wooded, partially open fields, shop buildings on it, metal fabrication, all sorts of different things. It was a fun place to grow up, but there's always stuff going on. The acres and acres of lawn that needs to be mowed, and he told me to go get something. We were working on something. He told me to go get something, so I start walking over to go get it. Walking, and then suddenly next to me, just whoosh! My dad runs past me, grabs the thing, and starts heading back, and chews me out for not running to go get it. I don't remember exactly what he said, but something about it was, hey, you're a kid, so that means you run everywhere. And then it goes further, and then he puts me on a stool out in the middle of the field where he passed me. Here's a stool, and okay, sit on the stool, because he was frustrated with me not getting that thing fast enough. That was my dad. Another time, he told me, hey, go to the tool shed and get the machete. I'm like, okay, go in the tool shed, look around. I know exactly where it is. I know exactly what he's talking about, because kind of had to know, because he wasn't going to give you details on things. So I look around. I can't find it. I was like, oh, shoot, it was put somewhere else. I can't find it. Look around, just wait a few more seconds. I'm like, okay, I got to go back. So I go back. I'm like, hey, I can't find it. He's like, it's right here in this spot. Go get it. I'm like, shoot, I know it's not there. So I go look again, looking around, cannot find it. I'm looking all over the place, cannot find it. I go back to him like, it's not there. It's supposed to be right here in this spot. It's not there. Looks at me and just like, no, it's in this spot. What are you talking about? It's right there. And takes me over to the tool shed. The whole time he's just frustrated. He's like, oh, slowing the whole thing down. We were trying to get this done quick. Just needed the machete. It's just a machete. Get the thing, and it's right there. It's on the wall, and nope, it's not there. And he's just suddenly just dead silent, just staring at it. Doesn't say a thing. Just turns and quietly walks out. Walk out with him. Now that was another thing. So my dad was not a please or thank you guy. And he most definitely was not a I'm sorry guy. Small talk in general, it's just not something he does, but you weren't going to hear those kind of things either. Now, I know I'm sort of painting a negative picture of my dad. But like I said, I want to show you some of the things that I had a problem with. I looked as a kid and I went, I'm frustrated with this. I think there's only one person in my entire life. I can say this honestly. I think there's only one person in my entire life that I've ever reached the point of hatred. And that was my dad. Because I was just frustrated. Pretty much anything that I could be frustrated with, I was frustrated with. And oh boy, if being sat on a stool out in the middle of the field because you didn't run to go get the thing, that was nothing. I was like, oh well. What was the soul crushing thing? People talk about like, oh, the worst thing you can ever hear is your dad saying, I'm disappointed in you. No. I can go further than that. It is not your dad saying he's disappointed in you. It's your dad turning that into a lecture, a soul-crushing lecture where there's literally nothing you can say, and it's not going to end. You're not learning and growing through this, and he's frustrated and can't understand why you don't get why what you did was wrong. But you do understand why it was wrong, but he can't see that. And he's frustrated. And he's frustrated with you. Why aren't you getting this? And you know what? I'm someone, if you haven't been able to tell, I'm someone who's decently logical. I hope I've proven that I'm pretty good at stringing arguments together. Yeah, I got that from my dad. It's a trait of his line of the family. Just the intellect. The certain wit mind. It's a trait. And but that would come out in lectures. That would just, it's hard to describe how much as a little kid it just like crushed you and defeated you. I remember just unable to process these things. And again, there's nothing. I remember one time. Now this, one time, as I got older, I'd start to be more proactive in those lectures, and they turn more into arguments. Well, one time I brought up the word argument, and he's like, "We're not having an argument." And so I printed out the definition of argument. I'm like, "Yeah, we are. Look here, definition of an argument. We're having an argument. We're not like angry yelling at each other, but we're having an argument. We're having a disagreement here." And he just looks at it, looks up, hands it back to me and says, "You're wrong." There's also another time he wanted me to install something somewhere, and he's a big stickler about certain things, and he made a big deal of doing it right, doing how the instructions say, which is kind of funny because we generally wing things. My dad is someone who I've learned over time. He doesn't have a perfectly thought out plan. He just happens to know every detail of every contingency involved in a situation, and thus he can adapt to anything that's going on. So functionally, he has a plan. He will always have a plan because he knows what's going on. But he told me, and he made a big deal about it. So I'm like, fine. Essentially, almost despite him, I'm like, I'm going to do it perfectly. And he gets frustrated. He's like, hey, just finish this up. Do this thing. I'm like, nope, right here in the manual. Says explicitly, do not do that. Gets mad at me. And then just pushes me out of the way and does it how he wanted. As a kid, I felt like there was no winning. And that's why I would do stuff like that. Because I felt like there was no winning. You do it right, You did it too slow. You did it wrong. You caused problems. You do it wrong. Well, that's a problem. You did it wrong. You're going to get a lecture about that. I remember at one point, I can remember perfectly because, my goodness, my parents' house, that thing, there's hardly any timber that's left original in that house. It's been so thoroughly remodeled over time, multiple times throughout my youth. It was in a constant state. Some room was being redone because he could just do that. So we did. But I remember, no flooring in the kitchen, just the subfloor. And he's getting, this is when I was starting to get a little bit older. I was a teenager at that point. And I was pushing back on something. And I wasn't even challenging him. I was just holding my ground. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to play this game. I'm not going to, I'm not going to let this lecture get to me. I'm not going to do any of this. So I just straight-faced it. I'm sure I probably didn't actually. I probably had a look on my face. I'm slipping in already. Just things clarifying that I'm talking about the perspective of Kyle the youth, not Kyle the adult. But I remember this, and he got so mad at me. He was already just so frustrated, and he just got so mad at me. And I'm pretty sure the order, I don't think he said anything first. He took me, threw me to the ground, and was on top of me, arm onto neck or head, pinning me to the ground, and said, you want to fight? Is that what you want? You want to challenge me like that? You want to fight? I was just like, no. I just want this to be done. At that point in my life, I was just dead inside. So I was like, whatever, I don't care. This is going to be another lecture, and I'm going to move on. I remember another time, I forget exactly what happened. Again, teenager now. And some lecture on something, just absolutely chewing me out. It was a big one. It was on Christmas Eve. And I was just like, screw this. I'm done. He left me in my room, shut the door, and I'm like, I'm done. I didn't have, I don't know why I didn't have any socks in my room. I remember this clearly. I didn't have any socks. I think I had like a pair of dress socks and dress shoes. I don't know why the socks weren't in my room at that time. All my clothes were in my room. I don't know why the socks weren't, but that's all I had is dress socks and dress shoes. And it's one of the rare times that there was actually snow on the ground where we lived. And it was cold in general. It wasn't just snow on the ground. It was actually cold. And so I had those on, put those on, slipped out my window, and started to just slipped into the woods because I could get there quicker and kind of be out of sight. And I was just like, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm just going. Well, I got maybe 500 feet away, still on my parents' property, and no, it's probably not 500 feet, probably more like 250 feet. And I just stopped, and I was like, this hurts. It's so cold. So then I slipped around another place, and I went into my great grandpa's old house that was used mainly for storage. I was just I had a sleeping bag, and I was just trying to warm up, and I couldn't. And so finally, like an hour later, I went home. I couldn't even feel my feet, and I was like, okay. And I just stood on a heater vent for the next hour just to try and get feeling back. But, the point of all of this is to say, when I was asked, what was it like growing up with your dad? As a kid, I always said it was very hard. I was frustrated all the time. I was going through all sorts of stuff. At this point, I wasn't even saved. I wasn't saved till I was 16, despite what everyone around me would have thought. I was depressed, hopeless. The world just, had no meaning to it, no value. And, I had all this stuff going on at home, and I was just miserable, absolutely miserable. I remember one time my dad, during one of these lectures, and at the point where I was starting to kind of talk back a little bit, and I was calling him out on just not doing a good job as a father, or at least, I thought I was calling him out. And I was like, look, you're not even doing the things. He's talking about something about success, and he's making it clear that success was financial success. The job of a father is to raise up his kids to be financially successful. That's the number one thing. He's not a greedy man, not by the longest of long shots. He's actually a pretty generous man. Always has been, always will be. But I was like, what about other things? Like, what do you mean other things? I'm like, what about like having relationships with people? Just being able to talk with other people, just interact in society. He's like, oh, you figure that out on the way. I'm just like, oof, that hurt. I mean, it shouldn't be the most surprising thing. My dad is my socially awkward tendencies. Yeah, I think that also comes from my dad as well. We're not the most like sociable people. We're not like, you can do a bunch of small talk. We're not all this stuff. Now, if you're willing to skip right past that and just start having a conversation about something more specific, yeah. There's hardly a topic that you can't bring up that my dad can't start talking about, and actually know something about. So my wealth of useless knowledge doesn't just come from me. It's not just something that came out of nowhere. But to say I was frustrated with my dad would be an understatement. I went from a point as a little kid, little kid, of looking at my dad as the ultimate hero. Superheroes, they don't even hold a candle to my dad, because my dad is the ultimate hero, because he's real, and he's my dad. I went from that to getting to a point where, like I said, I don't want to say it, but I think it's true that I hated him. I wanted nothing to do with him. I didn't want to be anything like him. I wanted to be just form my life to be the opposite of him. And it was to the point. I remember this in particular. As a kid, you can very clearly tell your parents' handwriting apart. Your dad's handwriting, your mom's handwriting. You're so exposed to it, and you've been so exposed to it for so long. Doesn't take anything. But I went, hey, he's the ultimate hero, and I just want to be wherever he is. I want to do whatever he's doing. I want to learn whatever he has to know. I want nothing to do with him. I got to the point where like I would know he's like hear him coming with a tractor or something, and I'd go run and hide. I was like, I'm just gonna get out of the way. He can't tell me. He can't make me do something if I'm not around. Out of sight, out of mind. One time got caught doing that. That led to a lecture. But it was so bad that when I left home after high school, I had an opportunity to go help at a church on the coast, a couple of hours away. And so I took that. Like, in my mind, I'm like, hey, that's a win-win. I get to do something good, and I get to get it away from the house immediately. And I remember this, that there was a note in my car. My people talk about, they talk about my dad and they're like, oh, he's not very like emotional guy. And, because he doesn't say how he actually feels about people. None of that kind of stuff. You want to talk about, oh, my dad never hugged me type stuff. Yeah, that's my dad. Okay. I remember very clearly, like, I thought something happened as a kid. I thought something happened. I thought I did something. I thought somebody did something to him. But I remember very clearly, not long after my sisters left the house, I felt like there was a change. Now I realized because my sisters were out of the house and I was starting to grow up a little bit, and more expectations were being placed on me. But I thought like things just radically changed. You know, do something, before, oh, we're doing something with dad, it's fun stuff, blah blah blah. Sometimes need to do things, but I'm kind of like learning fun things. And now it's like this ain't it anymore. But I remember getting in my car and there was a note, and I forget, it was super short note, and it said, I forget what it said in it exactly, but it ended with something about "I love you," and it was in my dad's handwriting. It had "Dad" written on the end, and I didn't believe it. And not that I didn't believe what it said. I didn't believe the note was real at all. And I read it and I got mad. Mad. Again, your parents' handwriting. I knew whose handwriting it was, but I'm like, nope. Mom wrote this note. She knows we can't stand each other. Supposedly that's my view of it, was that it was this mutual thing. Like, we both couldn't stand each other. And mom wrote it, fake note. That's even worse, to fake something like that. That's awful. And I crumpled the note up and threw it away. Yeah, this is the point. I've already said a bunch of stuff. This is a point where I'm like, oh my goodness, if my dad's listening to this, just again, it goes in another direction. But yeah, that's where I was at, because there were legitimately a lot of hard things, and I only scratched the surface. And there's other stuff I want to say, but I'm gonna. There's only so much I can go into that I think is fair to say. There are plenty of other things that happened. There have been conversations that me and my sisters had that I look back on that I think are just regrettable. There are things that happened, moments that kind of like shape. They're the types of things like your mind can just immediately go back to. They kind of shaped you type things that were pretty negative. And then I grew up. And, so this is clarify a couple things. So my dad went over to help his grandpa. And then his because of that, he got left the property. Generational. Hey, there's generational stuff. Think of generationally. You go help your family, as the Bible says. As the Bible says, and anyone that does not help his own family, and specifically talking about the previous generations, in the immediate context was widows, talking about mothers or grandmothers who are widows, anyone who's unwilling to take care of their widowed mother or grandmother, is worse than an unbeliever, the Bible says. It's pretty extreme language. That's thinking generationally. That's what the Bible thinks about being generational. It's a lot to do with taking care of the previous generations. But my dad, he did that. So that moved him. uh, an hour and a half ish from where he grew up, from where all of him and my mom's family were, uh, and where his job was. And he kept that job, moved around different companies, but it was all over in the same area. So he'd be commuting hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 hours each way every day for his job, because it was a good job. A really, really, really good job. Now, the parts he has to do, because that union, oh my goodness, it's like the mafia, but really good job. And he loved his grandpa. So he didn't want to give up that property. He loved the property itself, what it was able to give to his family. He loved that he could, through this good job, be able to have the money to give so many things to his family. He sent my sisters and I whole education, private schools. No, not hoity-toity private school. No, they were just nominally Christian schools. And I say that nominally Christian like it's a negative thing, and it caused some problems. But there was a good teacher at one of those schools who did make sure that I understood the gospel, and I finally got saved. So it was a very, very good thing. Better education too. Better in so many other ways, especially as I was going through it as a teenager. Better to be in an environment that's slightly better. Although pretty much anything you wanted to do, you could still get into. Any trouble you wanted to get into, there were people doing it. But it's that's the context. He's doing all this for his family, and I had a reputation. So I was just kind of lazily going through life as a young adult. There's a whole big other story there, but I was going through life. I had a reputation that I could lean on. I remember one time someone was we had a disagreement on something, and he was trying to rally people around him. And so he was in front of me. It was kind of weird too, but he was talking about, oh, Kyle's blah, blah, blah. He's saying this, and he was yelling at me about this. And someone just, as soon as he said yelling, he's like, Kyle doesn't yell. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be in this conversation anymore. But it just immediately, the look on his face was just someone that completely had the wind taken out of his sails. Because he realized he messed up, because I had this reputation. I was just an even-tempered person, even if I was upset. I wasn't going to yell at anyone. I wasn't going to do any of this stuff. And, at the time, I was kind of like, yes, I'm doing good. And in my mind, I was still a young adult. I was still angsty. I was still upset about things. And I was like, yeah, unlike my dad, I can keep myself in check. I'm so good. And I did. I really did think I was superior, even as I was being just kind of a lazy kid, bumming my way through life. I'm like, and I'm just kind of enjoying things. And I'm being good to people. I was also pretty lazy. But then I started to grow up more. Then I got married. Then I got kids. And then I was the one who was now working at a job that was an hour and a half or more from where he lived. And was having to do that sort of commute. And I am very much my dad's son, no matter how much I didn't want to be when I was younger. Very much my dad's son. Now I realize it's a good thing. But, I was working. I remember specifically, got a job. Again, this is the job at where my dad worked. And I am just going as hard as I can, 110%, and trying to find some more. And I'm just working so hard because I'm like, oh my goodness, hey, these projects, they have a certain amount of hours bet on them, and I got to hit that. I know I'm new, but I can't just be going over hours every single time. I've got to be learning this at the same time. I got to be doing a good job and getting it done fast. And I was doing a good job. I was learning quickly, and finally, some conversation sparked up. And my boss looked at me and went, "You do know that these are bid. The hourly rate is bid at the top end of designers." And I was like, "Oh." He's like, "Yeah, you could go 2 or more times over that hour-wise, and you're still not blowing the budget. Like, that's not just general hours. That's a quantity of money, and you're not making that much." And I was just like, "Okay. Well, yeah." Now, the thing is, I still couldn't let myself go on that. I was still hitting those hours. I'm like, I can't not. How, I was already doing it. I proved I could do it. I can't stop now. Oh boy, did that guy take advantage of that fact. Take advantage of my hard work. He did some kind of scummy things. But I found that under that sort of pressure, you have 2 young children at home, not sleeping super well. The infant is up, and the toddler is being a toddler. And oh my goodness, she just did not want to fall asleep at good times. She was phenomenal as an infant, and then suddenly became terrible as a toddler. But I suddenly found myself going from someone who is just unflappable. I couldn't be shaken by things, to actually relatively easily getting frustrated. Now, that it didn't help that not that much longer, a couple more years later, I'm developing health issues, and I'm still dealing with those. But yeah. And that's when I started to realize things. Everything started to come together. This picture started to develop, and I went, oh, I get it now. I was mad at my dad. Pretty much anything and everything that I could be mad about, I was mad about. I was mad that the way he treated me. I was mad that he all these different things that happened. I was mad that he put, from my perspective, this isn't even fully wrong, but from my perspective, it was even worse. But that he was putting money ahead of family. Now, the money was for the family. It's the typical blue collar, hardworking. It's not greedy. It's not selfish. Blue collar, hardworking. I got to provide for my family. He's doing everything he can to provide, and then some. He'd be out at work, and then he'd have his side businesses too. So he'd do whatever he could to get us ahead. But he did prioritize doing that over really being available for family, and I got upset with that. He sacrificed his dreams, and he really did. He wasn't gonna be a pipe fitter. That wasn't his chosen career plan. He was going to be an upholsterer, and he was really into classic cars. Still is. And over time, he had built up a collection of some pretty amazing cars. But he's like, upholsterers, that doesn't pay. I'm like, I still hold this opinion. For him, it would have. He doesn't do anything. He's not just an average guy. He's an above average guy. You look at all the different car shows on TV and whatnot. He would have been that sort of level. Easily. I think he could have done it. But I was upset about that. I'm like, you could have done that. You could have been around for your family. We wouldn't have had as much nice stuff. but you would have been there and you would have been happy. And then I grew up and I went, you know what? Those kind of decisions are easy to make when you're not the person making those decisions. When you can't see the financial path forward, you have to make choices. You have to go, I could try to make this work. Or, crazy thought, I could take this good job and provide for my family. Crazy thought. The thing is, he was willing to work hard. He didn't just sacrifice things. He sacrificed everything he thought he needed to in order to take care of his family. Did I think he hit the nail on the head with what he was willing to sacrifice? No. And again, I learned something doing that sort of commute. Now, I wasn't doing the manual labor. So he's doing, generally commuting more than me and doing the manual labor. And he has some, I have different ones and more things, but he has some health problems than I share. And I look at that and go, boy, I struggled during that time. This was not easy. And it left me generally more tired. Generally a little bit easier to get frustrated. Well, actually a lot easier to get frustrated. And that's hard to handle perfectly, to say the least. Say the least. It is not easy to handle that right. And so guess what you do? You make mistakes. You get backed into a corner and you go, oh my goodness, I have to make a decision. And you make a decision and it's super easy to get that criticized. And you know what? It's painful when you make a hard decision and someone criticizes that. That's who I was. I was actually the one that was generally in the wrong. Even if he got something wrong, I generally still put myself in the wrong position. I generally still make myself actually the more of the problem one in the situation. Could he have done things better? Yes. But he wasn't a bad guy. He isn't a bad guy. He's not a bad dad. There are so many other things I can think of. But, it comes down to everything he was willing to sacrifice was for his kids. And there's no one on the planet that would be willing to sacrifice more for his kids than he is willing to sacrifice. Go extraordinarily out of his way. Extraordinarily out of his way to take care of people, to take care of his family. And I've had to check my attitude, completely change it, and realize there are things I disagree with. There are things that were wrong. There are moments that he didn't handle things properly, but now I go, oh my goodness, would I have done better in the same situation, or would I have been exhausted and frustrated and just trying to do the best I could? And would I have done any better? Probably not. I could say I would have. I could see, hindsight's 2020. I could come up with a perfect solution, but just not there. Yeah, he's someone that's hard to work right next to. His expectations are, beyond through the roof. But once you get it better than anyone else because you really know it. And you're already at a high quality level. Because he actually cares about the person that he's trying to teach. Doesn't know how to express it in like a hoi do yay sort of way, but he's like, I'm gonna make sure you know this. Now he's not a teacher. Not a teacher. But he can still train people. And again, make them the best of the best. So what's the point of all of this? The point of all of this is to say, man, I was so wrong about this. And though I can point out things that I see that are wrong, the general trajectory is right. The things that are wrong are not these what I thought they were. In fact, a lot of it's more me, my bitterness and bitter attitudes, my superiority and arrogance, my lack of understanding and patience, this is an impressive thing to say, my lack of empathy and willingness to consider the other person. It's kind of funny because that was one of my big criticisms of my dad as a child. Turns out I was the one that was really having a problem with that because I didn't want to accept the realities of life and how difficult life actually is. I didn't want to actually think about how much my dad was actually doing. But it's men like him that built this country. It's men like him that took this country to where it's at. We'd complain about inflation and prices nowadays. You know what? We wouldn't have had the good times without men like my dad that were willing to sacrifice to take care of their family, sacrifice to build something better, sacrifice to see growth. They built this economy. They were the ones that were willing to go to factories and industrial jobs. They were the ones that were willing to build things up, to do work that nowadays we're so weak we don't want to do, that we outsource to other places. And yeah, were the boomers a perfect generation? No, but I think they're actually far better than, as a millennial. I think they're far better than millennials. They got their own problems, but we got our own problems. Not to mention Gen X or Gen Z. We've all got problems. And do you know what? A lot of the problems actually come from they did such a good job at just exploding the economy. Them and their fathers went and fought in the war, came back. They built up, exploded this country economically. Just unimaginable opportunity and wealth. And there was a lot of complacency that got built because of that. Yeah, people got lazy. People started to have enough time to go, I wonder if I would actually rather be attracted to men than women. You didn't have time to consider things like that. Even in this country, even 100 years ago, you were working. You had to just exist. You didn't have the kind of luxury that we do now. And yeah, just, that luxury can be a bit of a trap, but it's not a bad thing. Well, it makes it clear that it's not a bad thing. It's how we handle it. Our parents gave us something amazing. Our grandparents' parents gave us something amazing, and we trashed it. Then we look at them and go, why did you give us a bad gift? So arrogant on our part. It's the childish attitude speaking. Child Kyle speaking. Not a grown-up Kyle. Grown-up Kyle who now knows better. Who knows? No. We need more. Let me clarify this. We need more men like my dad. Not less. More. Now, do I want to see men like, just like my dad? No, I want to see them grow. I want to see opportunity created that allows them to thrive and to not be constantly exhausted and not have to face some of the challenges that my dad faced. I always want to see people be better than what they are, than who they are, than where they are. But again, I'd rather take an army of men like my dad than an army of so many people from my generation. They worked so hard to build this country up. And yeah, they're also the generation that got into free love and all sorts of other nonsense. One, that wasn't my parents. But two, they're not the generation that thinks that men can be women. That's us. That's the younger generations that started pushing that. So we're going to turn around and go, oh, see, some things started during your time. Therefore, you're responsible for all the problems now? No. No. It's time for us to start thinking generationally by looking backwards at our parents and going, I think you did a better job than we give you credit for. And we need to unite arm in arm with you. We need to, connect kids to grandparents, build actual generational things. We need to be willing to go, hey, my grandpa needs help. He cannot take care of his property anymore. He needs help. And I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go do that. Now, my grandpa was a good sport about that. He put a mobile home, and not junky thing, but put a mobile home on his property for my parents to live in. It was a mutual thing, but yeah, he was willing to go take care of his grandpa because his grandpa needed to be taken care of. Or more in the sense of he couldn't take care of the property, so he was taking care of the property. But we need to be able to do stuff like that. Because again, that's a really foreign thing nowadays. That's a good thing. That's generational. We need to be like that. And guess what? That's coming from a boomer. Please, can we just not be arrogant about this? We need to unite with people of all generations who are seeking good, who are seeking the Lord. We need to care for our families first. That's not just looking forward. That's looking backwards. We need to not look at the past and go, oh my goodness, boomers did X and Y and this and that. What are we teaching our kids? What are we teaching our kids? We're teaching our kids to just blame their parents. Blame their grandparents. What do you think is going to happen? You're not creating generational thinking there. What you're doing is instilling an attitude in your kids that when they come across problems in the future, they're going to look back and say, they're going to turn back to you and say, yeah, this is your fault. You didn't handle this right. Instead of coming up with solutions, because guess what? The boomers were a really good, hardworking people. They were really good about solutions. They caused problems, but they're also really good about solutions. They're probably a good people to go to for some wisdom about changing things, about hard work. They experienced it. Most of you haven't. Some of you have. There's good hardworking guys out there. I'm not criticizing broadly there. Just want to be clear. But a lot of people haven't. We've lived in such isolated lives. And the biggest threats we're facing right now are threats that are just taking away a little of that isolation. Anyway, again, if we want to change things in the society, it took generations for cultural Marxism to make its way in and install wokeness as the dominant worldview. And that's talking about the open adherence to it, but also just so many other people. So many people just default to that worldview and don't even realize it. Which is why we try and talk about things here. Try and, deconstruct the woke worldview that has been taught to you. All of us have degrees of that nonsense in us because it's been being taught. It's been just being promoted, propaganda everywhere. We can fight back. But we need to, it's going to take a lot of humility. Bold humility, but humility. Humility before the Lord. Humility that honors those who came before us. Humility that's willing to learn what can be learned, even if we see things that should be changed. But that's growth. Growth is taking what's already good and growing on it. So that's where I hope I can be. I hope I can be. I hope I can get to a point where I'm half the man my dad is, and then keep growing from there. I'm someone who's looking at previous generations and going, there are some powerful, powerful people there, and they're not all dead yet, so we better go learn from them. Obviously, if they have a mistaken view, you don't pick up the mistaken view, but I can guarantee that there's probably many more mistaken views in the younger generations than there are in the older generations. We're just too arrogant to see it. I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has really got you thinking about a few things. I hope, if nothing else, it makes you want to go call your dad. But God bless you, and remember, don't go woke.